Hi, it's a wonderful sunny day, and I just got back from Prince Rupert. I went there for medical, so I apologize for not having two broadcasts this week, but I'm hoping your week was good and full of good things, and I want to encourage people to continue to be positive and to continue to do your art. I've gotten through the Nahin portion, and now I'm doing a ravenstail technique down here in this lower design area. I'm in isolation again, and so I have no helpers for the next couple of weeks. I would like to demonstrate today my weaving of the ravenstail techniques, and I picked up a story of Tsimshian myths, so I'm hoping I can read you an interesting story from that new book that I picked up in Prince Rupert, where that land is the coastal Tsimshian's traditional lands. And I did get to go to the museum there, and they have a great collection of different books, and so I picked up a few, and I will read some Tsimshian stories to you as I demonstrate. All ravenstail objects start your weaving. The weavers always start with weaving on and starting on the left. And so I've entered the 2 strands here. It was a simple rigid weft entry. I'll do that again so that you can see it. Okay, so I wove the blue all the way to the edge of where the blue begins or where the black begins. And now I'm going to take the black yarn and circle around it, those blue weavers, and then I'm going to push the blue to the back behind one. Now I'm going to take that top black and that top blue, and I'm going to start weaving with these 2, and I'm going to drop and not pay any attention to the 2, the black and the blue that I dropped. So I'm going to take and bring the black forward, and the blue stays to the back. So in this 2-color, 2-strand technique, it's what color you want forward is where you bring it, and the color you don't want gets brought to the back. Now here, I'm going to pick up these 2, and I need to bring the blue behind 2 and not just the 1, because I want to continue to break the pair above. So that will cause a nice strong weave. And they'll stay there till I'm through with the row here. This first row. So that is a 2-color, 2-strand technique where you're bringing the color you want forward, and you're pushing the color you don't want back. I'm reading Tsimshian texts by Franz Boas, and I believe there was an interpreter, Mr. Henry Tate, who was a full-blood Tsimshian of Port Simpson. So he helped collect these stories and interpret them and translate them. So this is the story of Asdiwal, or the meeting on the ice. Asiwal. I again apologize, I'm not a speaker of Tsimshian. Well, when a great famine reached the people of the Skeena, then a chieftainess was also among the starving people, and a young woman who had married a man of a town way up the river. Her mother, however, was in her own village at Canyon. That town is way down the river. That was when the great famine reached the villages. Then the husband of the chieftainess died, and the husband of the young woman also died of starvation, for the starvation in the villages was really great. Therefore many died. Then one day the chieftainess talked to herself when she was hungry. Therefore she said, "I remember when I used to meet my daughter." Then the young woman also said, "I remember when I used to meet my mother, when I go down the river, and when I go near her, then I shall eat food. Then I shall have enough to eat." Well, the famine struck the people every year in the winter, when it was very cold. It was that which cleared off all the people, therefore they died. Therefore one day the chieftainess rose to go to the ice to the young woman. On that same day the young woman also arose to go also to her mother. Therefore she went on the ice too. Then they met between the two towns on the ice. They were both very hungry, she and her daughter. There was nothing to eat. Both were left alone by death, she and her mother. Then they sat down and wailed and wept because of their husbands who had starved to death. When they had cried for some time, they stopped wailing, and then they went ashore to make a camp at the foot of a large tree. Then the young woman went about. Then she found one rotten hawberry. Then she gave this to her mother, one half of the rotten hawberry, and she herself ate the other half. Then she made a small house of branches, and they began to drill fire to make a fire in a small house of branches where they lay down. Before they lay down, they made a great fire to lay down warmly. Then they slept well. On one side of the fire, the old woman on her part lay down with her back to the fire, and on the other side, the noble woman on her part lay down. They were on their backs towards the fire. When it was midnight, a man entered and went to the little noble woman. He went to her and lay down, and they lay down together. The old woman did not notice. Early in the morning the young man rose and went out. Then they on their part saw that their fire was about to extinguish. Then the young noble woman went out to gather bark, and then she went to the place where a large rotten spruce tree was standing. She took a very long stick as a means of breaking off the bark, and when she began to break off the bark of the great spruce tree fell down. Then when she gathered up the bark, she found a little squirrel among the bark. Then she returned to her little house of branches, being of good heart. Then she made a large fire. Then she roasted the little squirrel. Then they ate it. It was enough for one day for them. When it was morning again, she went again to the place where she had been before to get bark. She took again a very long means of breaking off bark. Then the bark fell down again, and then she gathered it up again. Behold, she found again a large grouse among the bark that she was gathering. She returned happy, and then she roasted it also. It was enough for them for one day. As was morning again, and the little noble woman went again. She went again to the foot of the large spruce tree. She again gathered bark. The bark fell down, and she put it together again. Then she found a large porcupine. She took it down and gave it to her mother, and then her mother took the large porcupine. Then she burnt it over, and it was enough for them for 2 days. It was morning again, and she went out again to gather bark. And when she found amongst the bark a beaver, she brought it home. Her mother dried the meat of the beaver. It was morning again, and she went to get bark. Then she found a large mountain goat among the bark. She called her mother to help her, and they took down the large mountain goat. Then they increased the size of the house they had made of branches to dry the meat of the mountain goat. It was morning again, and she went again to gather bark, and then she broke off again the bark. The bark of the large spruce tree fell down again, and verily she saw a large black bear falling down with it. Again she called to her mother to help her, and then they took the large black bear down to the house. It was morning again, and they went to the place, and that time they found the grizzly bear. Therefore they cut it up, spread it, and then they just took down the meat. Then their house was full of dried meat. Every morning before she went to gather bark, she heard Tsimshian. This was the bird that would make noise in the morning. Speak on the top of a large rotten spruce tree. One morning she went up again to gather bark, and then she found a large caribou. Before she was about to call her mother, she heard a man going up to her from behind. Therefore she suddenly turned around. Behold, a handsome young man stood near behind her. All of a sudden she was much afraid. Then the handsome young man asked her, "What are you doing here?" Then the woman said, "Oh, supernatural one, I am gathering bark here. That is where I find animals every morning. Then I gather bark." Then the young man continued and questioned the young woman. "Do you not know whence all the animals come that you have found?" Then the woman said, "No." Then the young man said to the woman, "I am the one who has given you the animals that you always find among the bark that you are gathering. I am also the one who entered your house when you were beginning to sleep in your camp." That was when the young noble woman was glad. Then she was pregnant. He said, "Go and tell your mother that I desire to marry you." Then the young man promised everything good to the woman. When he finished speaking, he suddenly disappeared. However, her mother came up to where she was, for she had been away for a while. Then her mother asked her, Why have you been away so long?" And then the young woman related to her mother that a young man had shown himself to her. And then he told me, she said to her mother, "It was he who has given all the animals that I found every morning when I gathered bark. He also asked me to say that he desires to marry me if you should agree. And he has also promised that we shall be rich and that he will help us with everything." When he finished speaking this, he disappeared suddenly. Then the mother agreed, and when her mother began to agree, then suddenly they heard the voice of Tsimshian on top of the large rotten tree, that one where she had gone before to gather bark. Then 2 large grizzlies fell down, then 2 large black bears, then 2 large mountain goats came down from top of the large rotten spruce tree. Then the young man suddenly stood there again. The mother of the princess was very happy, and the young man accompanied the woman down, and then he married the princess, and the young man took down the animals. The story goes on a little more, and I can continue to read it another time, but I just wanted to say that it reminds me so much of other stories in the Haida Masset myths, because they continue to get food in unexpected places, and then it comes from the supernatural. The food comes from the supernatural. But in this story, because it's from the mainland, you're getting a lot of land animals as food. And in our Haida stories, the people find fish and salmon and whales, and it does, the game gets larger and larger on the mainland story, and the sea mammals get larger and larger on the Haida story. So anyway, thank you for joining me, and I again hope you have a great weekend. Hawa.